Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany, and good morning to our viewers in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Since September 26th and the German federal election, an Ampelkoalition, or traffic light coalition of the Social Democrats, Greens, and Free Democrats seems increasingly likely, but it's not a given. There are other coalition possibilities as four political factions, if you add the Christian Democrats into the mix, are jockeying for a role in a new government that is likely to be made up of three rather than two parties. As the party leadership explores possible coalition options, there are questions about where the parties will align and where they differ, and what priorities a new government might have. I'm delighted to be joined by author and journalist Martin Klingst to discuss Germany's political landscape and to explore the domestic and foreign policy priorities of a governing coalition led by the Social Democrats' Olaf Scholz. Martin cut his teeth as a journalist in 1987 with NDR, the Norddeutscher Rundfunk, and spent much of his career with Die Zeit, including as senior political correspondent in Berlin, and before that, US correspondent based in Washington, DC, where he was also the bureau chief. After leaving Die Zeit, he served as chief speechwriter and head of strategic communication in the office of the German federal president, and he is currently working as an advisor to both the German Marshall Fund and Atlantikbrücke. Martin, herzlich willkommen.
Hello, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Happy to talk to you.
I am delighted to have you with us. And what I failed to mention is that you are actually with us in the US. You're in Washington, DC for a couple of weeks as part of your work with the German Marshall Fund. But you just arrived recently from Germany. And so you still have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Germany.
Yeah, but it's good to be back after 18 months.
Yes, yes. Believe me, I'm jealous. I am jealous, and I am looking forward to being able to travel to Germany myself, hopefully in the not so distant future. So the big news, I think today, is that yesterday Armin Laschet, the chancellor candidate for the center-right CDU, indicated that he would step down as the party's leader. He said that he will convene a party conference in the coming weeks to solve what he referred to as the Personalfrage, or question of personnel, and indicated that there should be an end to the divisive internal power struggles that have been visible since Merkel's resignation as party leader in 2018. The other big news this week is that the leaders of the Greens and the pro-business Free Democrats have started coalition talks with Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats. And although those talks are expected to last for weeks, this is a really important move toward forming a new government and ultimately electing a chancellor. So, Martin, I thought we could start by getting your take on what's going on in German politics right now, what's bubbling up, both within the CDU, CSU, as you hear this news from Olaf Scholz, and what's going on with these coalition talks.
Maybe if you allow, I just start with a brief outlook on the election outcome, and because I've always been being asked that by American friends, that also there's a difference between election results you have seen somewhere else and in Germany, because the center has come out strong and the fringes are weakened. Though when you look at the German electoral landscape, you will see that 4 states in the south remained either extreme conservative or conservative. So in Eastern Germany, the 2 southern states of Saxony and Thuringia, there the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, the right-winged party, came out strongest. They didn't gain votes, and why they came out strongest is because the CDU, the Conservative Party, Christian Democratic Union, lost dramatically there. And in the western part of Germany, it's the two states of Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, where the Christian Democrats or the Christian Social Union Bavaria remain strongest. So 4 out of 12 federal states, only the conservatives or ultra-conservatives won. In all those 12 other states, the Social Democrats won, even sometimes with a very just slight majority. So, but the center actually was strengthened, and there are 3 winners. And the 3 winners are the Social Democrats that gained more than 5% in comparison to the last federal election. And the Greens gained more than 5%, also in comparison to the last election. And the Free Democrats, the Liberal Party, also gained. So these 3 are actually the only winners in this election. And it was actually pretty clear from the first moment on that there will be probably, a drive towards this so-called traffic light coalition. And why? Because the Christian Democrats lost dramatically. They came in second, which didn't happen often in Germany. I think it only happened twice, once in 1972, and now that they came in second. And for them, it was a dramatic shock. And on election night, the CDU leader and candidate for the chancellery, Armin Laschet, declared that he still has a strong mandate to govern. And no one understood this because the election results showed, a very different outcome. And from that moment on, when you look at public polls, you could see a much larger support for this traffic light coalition than for also another coalition, which is still possible under a chancellor of the Conservative Party, which is called the Jamaica Coalition. So that's just to say what has happened. When you look at the CDU, I think for them they're still in shock, though I sometimes think they have not yet quite understood what really has happened, because to only come in first in 2 of 16 states is actually a dramatic shift. But you have seen this shift for a long time. The so-called people's parties, that was once the Social Democrats and the Christian Democratic Union, they are no longer actually People's Party. Both have around 25%, so 75% of the population voted for different parties. So I think this shows you something that has been going on. The CDU last time just had roughly about 32%. So this is something you can probably observe in all of Europe. And this has been going on for some time. And this, I've read several articles here in the United States that talk about that the voters have left the German parliament in chaos. And I would caution this analysis, because a multi-party system does not necessarily mean chaos. I mean, I think you have this time very sober negotiations between the parties. It takes a long time because they have to bridge wide gaps. We can talk about that later. But they all are willing to actually come to terms and negotiate as quickly as they can and to settle in on a new coalition. So it does not necessarily mean chaos. And I actually think, for the first time, we will have this 3-party coalition. Normally, you had one of the bigger parties just coalesce with one other party. This time, 3 parties have to actually unite on a common program. This needs some talking, but it also shows that Germany is still a country where the center needs to compromise and is willing to compromise, and political extremism is on the fringes.
Thank you, Martin. And I guess last time around in 2017, Germany came close to the first three-party coalition because there were the discussions between the Christian Democrats, the Free Democrats, and the Greens in that Jamaica coalition. But the Free Democrats walked away from the table, and the Social Democrats ended up sort of falling on their sword and forming another grand coalition with the Christian Democrats. It wasn't anybody's first choice, but it was kind of the best alternative after the coalition talks fell apart. This time around, it looks like there will be a three-party coalition, and as you've said, that the Ampel or traffic light is the most likely. A Jamaica is a possibility. Some people are still talking about a grand coalition, though, to sort of keep the option open and to keep the door open. But right now, it seems as if the most serious talks are the talks between the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. And so I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Obviously, part of these coalition talks revolve around who gets which roles, which ministry, which job. But it also comes down to developing a Koalitionsvertrag or a coalition agreement, which is sort of a work plan for the time in office together. And so I'd love to hear from you what you think the distribution of labor might be in terms of who might get which ministry if the traffic light coalition moves forward. But then also to talk a little bit about where you see some of the sticking points between these three parties, because they don't necessarily align on everything.
No, that is true. There's huge gaps. But what they this time try to avoid is a big mistake that they've committed last time. Last time, Merkel was the winner of the election, but she could not just govern with one of the smaller parties. She could either, lead a grand coalition or a three-party coalition. So they tried Jamaica. The mistake they committed was, that Christian Democrats and the Greens were, especially Merkel and some of the Greens were, just so desperate to govern together that they forgot that there's also a third party, the Liberal Party. And the Liberal Party felt, being left outside in many of those talks and being just the minor partner, even though they came out stronger than the Greens in that election. And so they felt like the unwanted baby. And I think this was, from the way to create a good atmosphere for negotiations, this was bad. So this time, actually, they do it very differently. That means first, the Greens and the Liberals that have the biggest gaps between them started to talk first. And I think, what you feel, and it's just a gut feeling, but is that they actually think that they are the driving forces of reform. They come from different angles, have different viewpoints on a couple of issues, but they both want to make progress. And I think that is what unites them. And you have to bear in mind that when you look at the election results among young voters, so Liberals and Greens gained most votes. So they came out strongest among young voters. And that means that they are there for change. And I think that could be a very spirited coalition, even though they dispute on several issues, but they want to actually move forward. And the second thing that has changed, and you could see that in those pre-talks that they had, because, also the two minor parties also talked with the Christian Democrats. And last time, they couldn't keep anything behind closed doors. Everything was revealed or, just whistleblowed within seconds. What was talked, or what was the content or the question who's getting which job. And this time they said, we're going to keep it to us. So in the pre-talks, some of the Christian Democrats actually also, picked up the phone and called some journalists and said, okay, this and that are contentious issues, or it went great because of this and that. So the Liberals and the Greens were pretty frustrated about that, and this soured their relation to the Christian Union. While the Social Democrats, even though they also like to talk, this time keep most of the time their mouth shut. And I think this has been agreed on, that they now in these pre-talks will actually first, where they try, do we have common ground? And can we get along? Do we have a good working atmosphere? And if that is all settled, then they can start actually negotiating the single issues. So I think this is different to previous times, that those three of the traffic light coalition agreed on talking behind doors and keeping their conversation to themselves. So this is when you talk about what jobs, I think first they talk probably about issues, but you're right. It's pretty clear that the Liberals want the Ministry of Finance because they want to keep their hand on the budget, and they are very opposed to a lot of deficit spending. They also, want, they're against common debts inside the European Union. They want to keep the European Stability Pact. So this is important for them. So I think that they, just would very much like the Ministry of Finance. And I would assume that they get it at the end. Even though the Greens would like that too. But the Greens, for them, what is feasible, for example, well, they will certainly get the Ministry of Environment, but this will actually be a bigger Ministry of Environment. They probably also get the energy sector, and probably maybe also part of the economic sector will be, just incorporated by this new Ministry of Environment. So it will be a very strong ministry. And another issue is whether this, new Ministry of Environment also gets a veto right. That means, the Ministry of Finance has a veto right. All laws that have to pass through this Ministry of Finance, and when they think it's too costly or explodes the budget or whatever, they can veto it. So I think the Greens would be very keen on also having a veto right on ecological issues. So when they say these new laws, they don't comply with what we've agreed on environmental issues, that they can veto those laws. And if the Liberals get the Finance Ministry, which is a very strong ministry, and the Greens then probably will also get, in addition to the environmental ministry, they will also get probably the foreign ministry. So the foreign ministry, one must say, has lost influence over the past years, as has the State Department here in the United States, because a lot of foreign policy is done here by the president or the NSC, and in Germany by the chancellor and the chancellor's office. So especially when it comes to Europe, I think this. I think Olaf Scholz, who is very much interested in Europe and getting the European agenda forward, I think will keep at least a lot of those powers in his chancellery. That about the major ministries. So the gaps between the parties. I think the two smaller parties, the Greens and the Liberal parties, they can very quickly agree on civil rights issues. They can quickly agree also on immigration issue. It's very interesting to see that both parties favor a new immigration law that allows up to 400,000 immigrants to enter Germany per year, which is a large number. But I talk about skilled immigrants. So both the Greens and the Liberals differ on the law of asylum. So the Greens are not very much in favor of refugees just coming, flocking to Germany. They want a more, regulated immigration. And if you have like a work immigration, then people have to go through, a whole procedure. So we have a big problem in Germany. That's a too small workforce. We need workers, unskilled and skilled. We need them in the service industry. I mean, I've seen that here too, but it's dramatic when you, for example, go through some cities at the restaurants. They have put signs on, sorry, we have to close tonight because we have no workforce. They can't open their summer terrace because there are not enough servers there, and so on and so far. So there is really, a lack of people, and also in skilled businesses. The car industry, high-tech industry, all are looking for workers. So I think this will be a major push, and I think that the Social Democrats will go along mainly on this issue. So I was talking where they probably can unite quickly, but where do they differ? I think they differ, first of all, in the question of minimum wage. Greens and Social Democrats want to raise the minimum wage up to 12 euros per hour. I think that they will argue about that. I think at the end of the day, the liberals will buy that. But what they will not do is raise any taxes. So Social Democrats and Greens both have in their programs declared that they want to tax high incomes. I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's, I think, more than 200,000 euros a year. They want to raise the taxes for those high incomes, and also on huge property and assets, and the liberals are absolutely against it, and they've already said, even before they started talking to one another, that raising taxes is a red line for them. It's an absolute no. So that's where they differ. I think you probably won't see any tax raises. They have to be inventive where they actually get the money for the projects they all want to do. So they want to put a lot of money in infrastructure, in digitalization. They want to move forward also in education, and the money has to come from somewhere. So it'd be interesting to see where they will cut and where they will just be more willing to spend money. This is on environmental issues. You also see differences. So no one neglects climate change. They all want to actually comply to the Paris agreements and to reach the 1.5% goal. But where they differ is in their approaches. The liberals are against actually raising CO2 prices and against government intervention. The Greens and the Social Democrats are more for government intervention. The Greens say we have to solve the problem mainly through free market emission trading, or through technological inventions. So that is where they actually differ. They both want to reach the same goals, but with different measures. So that's going to be interesting to see, how they actually agree on this issue. I've said on financial issues, there is the big gap. I think you see more similarity between Greens and Social Democrats, but any coalition with the liberals will have to see that they have to meet the liberals on the tax issues.
So, Martin, you've put a lot out there, and I found it interesting in the run up to these talks starting with the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. Even while the Greens and the Free Democrats were having their sort of preliminary conversations, the Free Democrats were making noises about the fact that they were open to Jamaica, that they were closer to the Christian Democrats than they are to the Social Democrats. And so That makes me wonder a little bit how much leverage the Free Democrats have in this process, or how much leverage even the Free Democrats and the Greens together have in this process. Because, of course, the situation today is very different from 2017, because this time around, it's the Greens that are the stronger of the two smaller parties, and that's significant. And it's the Free Democrats that are weaker.
Yes, that's a very good question, and I think we will see it while the talks go on. They have leverage, and I think what they try to do this time is not to show the leverage so openly, because they want, they as Olaf Scholz has put it, we have to, trust is going to be the basis. And we have to somehow like each other, because he said it's not, it shall not only be a coalition of necessity, out of necessity, it shall be a coalition, out of willingness, and that you want to work together. So they have to create this common ground. This means they have to create trust and a working atmosphere. And, if you take out the big stick too early, then, you just don't get anywhere. I think one thing that certainly the liberals would have liked to coalesce with the Christian Democrats, because, politically, philosophically, intellectually, they're closer to the Christian Democrats than to the Greens or to the Social Democrats. But the thing is that they, they're also, they know what realpolitik is, and they know what the voters wanted, and they can read results. And when you look at the moment at the polls, a Jamaica coalition is actually wanted by just a very small minority. It's very unpopular. And what they also see is, with whom shall they coalesce? And that brings me again back to one of your first questions: what happens inside the Christian Democratic Party? For them, it's actually, it's a major shock. As I said, only once before this time they came in second. But when they came in second, they still had more than 40%. That was in 1972, when the SPD under the Chancellor Willy Brandt got in first. The only time, no, second time, sorry, the third time. They Social Democrats also in 98 came in first.
Right.
And both Christian Democrats came in second. So I have to correct it. 3 times they came in second after World War II. But now they're down to 25%, or even 24 point something, which is, which was, just no one could actually ever envision that this could happen. And so if you would put pressure on the Social Democrats, you can still do that, and I think they will. But you also have to be cautious, because coalescing with the Christian Democrats in their condition would be very unpopular. And as you've pointed out rightly, Laschet has since yesterday said, okay, if they want to do Jamaica, they can do it without me. But who's going to be the successor? And you must bear in mind, even though the Chancellor is elected by the Parliament and not directly by the people, he ran for Chancellor. No one else in the Christian Democratic Union ran for Chancellor. So legally, they could actually replace him, and if they could put anyone there, and if he gets the majority in Parliament, he will be Chancellor. But I mean, to get public support, this would be very tough, because people say we have voted and we've put Olaf Scholz in first place. So they know that they actually should have a coalition with the 3 winning parties. And if there is nothing, that sounds, or turns out to be unbearable and too hard to swallow for any of the coalescing partners, I think they will probably get together. But and the Christian Democrats, I mean, even whatever they do now, it's not only about the one who leads. It's about their intellectual property, if you want to say, because they really must do soul searching first and see how they actually can be a conservative party again. Because what you've seen is a huge movement in this election from Christian Democrats to the Social Democratic Party and to the Greens. Why do I say that? Because the Social Democrats have been very weak in the past years, but that was mainly also because of Angela Merkel, who actually in her heart was more a social democrat than a Christian Democrat. And so the Christian Democrat always went along because she was the winner. And you always want to stay in power, so you go with the winner. But this time they lost, and so they have to do some soul searching to see, what the party really stands for. And they are in a difficult position because they have to see, on their right there's the AfD, and even though the AfD has not gained, they have lost more than 2% in this election. They're still there. And especially in the eastern part of Germany, they're a big threat to the Christian Democratic Union. And so I think they have to have a generational change, and they, as I said, they have to do soul searching what they really want to stand for as a good conservative party.
Well, and I think, over the course of this year, we've seen that Merkel's departure is really leaving a power vacuum within the Christian Democrats. It was very public to see Laschet and Söder go head to head, and even before that, the Friedrich Merz, Jens Spahn, Armin Laschet, Norbert Röttgen sort of playoff among key Christian Democrats, many of whom come from North Rhine-Westphalia, interestingly enough, who were all sort of jockeying for the position to be the head of the party / the Kanzlerkandidat of the Christian Democrats. And that was conducted in a very public manner, particularly in comparison with what we saw within the Green Party as the decision was made between Robert Habeck and Annalena Baerbock.
Right.
So it's I think right now what we're seeing is not only Chancellor Merkel leaving and pulling back, but now with Armin Laschet sort of indicating that he'll step down, a huge power vacuum within the CDU, and it remains to be seen whether the party sort of moves to the right or whether it stays where it is right now, and that will depend a lot on who the next leader is.
Right, and the interesting thing is, when you look at German politics, it was always that after a party has ruled for a longer time and then the leaders go, that it's always difficult to find someone that from the first moment on regains this strength. So, for example, when you look at Angela Merkel when she ran for the first time in 2005, she just barely won. She just got 1% more than the Social Democrats. Everyone thought she would win, by large numbers, but she didn't. And and then the next time she ran, she even lost a couple of percent, and then she gained again in 2013 to lose dramatically again in 2017, but still came out strongest. And this time they just came in second.
Yeah.
So you've seen this ups and downs, but also for the Social Democrats, when they lost power for the first time in 83, when they had when Chancellor Kohl was elected by Parliament and Helmut Schmidt had to resign. It took a long time for the Social Democrats, 15 years, to actually regain the Chancellor's office in 98 when Gerhard Schröder won.
Yeah.
And then it took him about 7 years, and then he was out of office in 2005. And now, 16 years later, a Social Democrat is back again. But in all those years, they had no good showing.
Well, and I would argue that even as long ago as recently as 3 months ago, nobody would have anticipated that the Social Democrats would be even eyeing the chancellery in the way that they are at the moment.
Yes.
And that the success of the party has everything to do with Olaf Scholz and not with the party redefining itself and really being compelling to
Yes.
many of the voters.
I would just say it mostly had to do with Olaf Scholz. I would not say all, because if you observe it over a long time, you could always say people first have to understand that Merkel is not running anymore. Mm-hmm. So when the Social Democrats, especially in the last year, in the beginning of this year, had this bad showing in the polls, they were like 13, 14, 15%. Right. A lot of pollsters said, yeah, but wait till the people actually understand that Angela Merkel will not be chancellor again. So then they will probably, say, okay, then we have to rethink. And this is also part, contributes part to the success.
Yeah. So while we're talking about the Social Democrats, you talked a little bit earlier about the minimum wage being one of the sticky points between the possible coalition partners, and yet it was an important campaign promise that Olaf Scholz brought up time and time again. And I guess I kind of want to wrap together two of the threads that you were talking about. One is, issues like the minimum wage, but also very much the domestic focus that the next chancellor will have to take when it comes to addressing issues like dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, like climate change, like some of the domestic reforms that are necessary. But then also what you were talking about foreign policy and how certainly during the Merkel years, foreign policy has been the responsibility of the chancellor. You indicated it's likely to stay that way. But I could also imagine a scenario where the Foreign Office regains some of its influence because the chancellor might be focused much more on domestic issues.
Yeah, true. But where I said, I think so far, where I think the chancellor will just keep his power is on European issues. Mm-hmm. When, Olaf Scholz is not a boring foreign policy guy. But as mayor of the city of Hamburg, he traveled quite a bit. He often went to China. And especially as finance minister, the finance minister is called actually the most powerful minister of foreign affairs, because he rules the euro, and a lot of European issues are based in his ministry. So I would say that he has discovered Europe is also something where he would like also to push a new agenda, and he gets quite well along with Macron. And I think he knows that the French, and this is a very important European issue, the French will vote next spring. And no one knows how this election will go, but the right wing have a good chance to win. So, and I think he will do probably almost everything he can do to support Macron and see what he can do for him that he wins a second term. But I think what they will, so part of what is European policy probably will remain in the Chancellor's office. But he will be certainly be focused on domestic issues and financial issues and European issues. So I think the next foreign minister will probably have a larger portfolio and will be more in the news. I think I was often asked, do you see any contentious issues between those three parties regarding foreign policy? Those are minor in comparison to financial issues or environmental issues. I think Greens and Liberals actually have quite a lot in common. Both are very critical when it comes to Russia or China. Both also argue about human rights when it comes to China. The Social Democrats, they also talk about those human rights, but Olaf Scholz is actually a real politician, from the bottom to the top. So he's he looks, at numbers and trade and export, and is not so concerned about human rights. While the liberals and the Greens are pretty tough on that issue, even also when it comes to Russia. So I think you will see probably a government that is going to be more critical, and this is actually interesting to see. I think the United States will probably, the Biden government will have a partner in Germany when it comes to the alliance of democracies. So there's, an issue that Biden has always pushed forward, and I think in Olaf Scholz he will probably find a partner, because Olaf Scholz has said, and over again, that the next years will show whether democracies, can succeed, and they only succeed when they show that they have the better answer to all today's and tomorrow's, big problems. So I think you will see Olaf Scholz is also a transatlanticist. So are the Green Party, the establishment, not the Green Party, to its lower ranks, but the Green Party establishment is also very, transatlantic oriented. Annalena Baerbock, has lived in the United States as an exchange student and has been here quite often. And the liberals are also transatlanticists. So I think there will not be major issues of concern. I'm also sometimes asked you, what do you think about defense policy? Yes, I think the 2% goal, that will probably be a goal that Germany will not meet 100%. Olaf Scholz has always said he wants more spending, and if you just, without, being partisan, but what you can say is that during his time as finance minister, the defense budget has seen its largest increase, while during the previous government, the coalition between the conservatives and the liberals, the defense budget actually was crushed. And he so in the last years it has, the spendings have really increased, not to what I deem necessary, but I think you will still see gradual improvement, but not 100%. They won't meet the 2% goal 100%. And there are, other things you have to maybe take into consideration, what they spend on issues that are defense related but don't go exactly into the defense budget.
So I'd actually like to maybe circle back to some of the things that you were just talking about when it comes to finance and fiscal policy, particularly given that that's very much Olaf Scholz's background, because I have two questions from one of our viewers that I think fit very well right here, and they relate to German fiscal policy. The first question is, domestically, how fiscally expansive will Germany become? Will the debt brake be ended, or will any additional green or investment spending be offset by higher taxes and restrained spending elsewhere? And that's something that you started to talk about a little bit when you talked about some of the differences between the Greens and the Free Democrats. But then in a broader perspective, the second question is that just this weekend, Chancellor Merkel warned that Germany still wants fiscal restraint and conditionality for any fiscal integration at the European level. Will the Social Democrats and the Greens be more keen than Merkel to increase European fiscal integration, or will they be less strict on European debt rules? And will they be less strict on European debt rules?
Mm-hmm. I think, if you just had the Social Democrats and the Greens, they would be less strict. For the first time, we had this the Corona Fund, and this was for the first time all Europeans took common debt, 750 billion euros, and but the liberals say this has to be an exception. And they are actually very much against communalizing debts in Europe. So I think, and there are also some social democrats that are pretty strict on that. Olaf Scholz used to be, but he, as finance minister, especially in the corona and the pandemic, he became a bit softer on this issue. But I cannot see the Liberal Party joining a government that is actually being soft on European debts. So I don't see much of a change there. And even some of the social democrats who come more from the left in the past days have said that the European Stabilization or Stability Pact is nothing that you should change right now. So that was, a step towards towards the liberals. The first part of your question about, spending, this is something I don't know how they're going to solve that, because they want to invest a lot in infrastructure, digitalization. They want to reform the country, so they need money on the one hand. On the other hand, with the liberals, they cannot raise taxes. Social democrats and Greens were actually for a capital tax or wealth tax. The liberals are strictly against it. So I think you probably can only see that either with shifting money from one side to the other, or having budget cuts on the one side and increasing the budget on the other side, to find some kind of balance. Otherwise, I don't know how they will raise, additional money that they need. That's going to be a very interesting question. They have to be very inventive. I think they will find a solution, but I cannot, at the moment, I cannot see, where they will actually meet. But they have to, because, they both all want to actually reform the country and want reforms that are costly, also increasing wind energy, solar energy, building, transport lines for wind energy from the coast to the south. All this costs money, and it's interesting to see and also where I don't have an answer yet is, you see at the moment increasing oil and gas prices. Mm-hmm. And everyone is talking about, a winter with, prices skyrocketing. And the Social Democrats and the Greens will not agree, on putting all the costs on the shoulder of the poorer people. So when they need money to heat their apartment, they have to get the money from somewhere, because I cannot envision a social democrat and green government with people freezing in their apartments because they cannot afford the energy prices anymore. So yeah. This is a very contentious issue, and I'm being curious to see how they solve it.
Yeah, Martin, I agree with you completely, because it will be very interesting to see in the coming weeks and indeed the coming months how this new government will address some of these issues and reconcile some of these different forces. I mean, I've certainly been asking myself the question about the election, whether this is a status quo election or a change election. And it really is a little bit of both. And I think that Olaf Scholz was able to sort of personify some of the continuity and stability of Merkel in a way that Armin Laschet was just not able to bring across. But that both Olaf Scholz and Annalena Baerbock, and now also the Free Democrats, are really talking about change. And as we emerge from the pandemic, issues like infrastructure, digitalization, an aging population, and workforce preparedness are the kinds of topics that the new government is really going to have to address. And these are things that are going to require spending. Yes. So it really remains to be seen how this government addresses these very real challenges in order to ensure that Germany remains competitive in the decades ahead.
Yes, and socially stable.
Yes, yes. So I'd like to maybe, as we start to wrap up, take a little bit of a step back. We talked a little bit about the leverage that the Greens and the Free Democrats have in some of these negotiations. You talked about the strong center with the four parties that are occupying the center on the political landscape. And I found it interesting as I watched the election results come in to see that Olaf Scholz and the Social Democrats lost some leverage because the Linkspartei, the left party, did not have as strong a showing. And had they been stronger, then Scholz might have been able to use that to say, look, we can still form a red-green coalition with the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Linkspartei. So he has lost that. But what's going on the fringes? Because one of our viewers is a little curious. You talked at length about the AfD, and it's important to remember that the AfD did win just over 10% of the vote. They are at about the same level as the Free Democrats in terms of the percentage that they got on a national level. But there are also movements like the Querdenker. The Linkspartei will be represented in the Bundestag, but they did not pass the 5% hurdle. Those Bundestag members are there because they won their direct mandate. What's going on the left and right periphery? And is that something that people should be concerned about as they look at German politics?
Yes, I think you should be concerned, and I'm concerned, and I keep being concerned. The left lost dramatically, so they were almost thrown out of parliament, and they did not meet the 5% threshold. And as you rightly pointed out, they just entered parliament because they had 3 directly elected members, and if that happens, then also those 4.9% are represented in representation to the percentage. But I think they will have major discussions where to go. This is also, they have actually, I would say there's several parties within one party. You have a more, let's say, socially conservative part in the left party, also represented by Sarah Wagenknecht, who was born and raised in East Germany and became something like a symbol figure for the left party. But she is, pretty much anti-immigration and has written a book that, where many people in the Green Party raised their eyebrows and said, oh, what is she actually propagating here? And then you have, I would say the cappuccino drinking left party in the big cities, but have nothing to do with the original left party in Eastern Germany in the more rural areas. So they have nothing in common. So it's being interesting how they bridge that, to see how they bridge that gap, and so they have to do a lot of soul searching too. So then you come to the AfD, and as I said, there are also different tribes, and you have a more, even though it's sometimes difficult to say, but within the right wing, you have also a more moderate wing that had its roots in the anti-Euro movement. The majority of them have left, but some have stayed, like one who's in the party leadership, Meuthen. He's a more moderate, and it was really interesting to watch after the election happened and they gave a press conference. He and the other party leader, Weigel, the woman, they're just so on opposite sides and dislike each other that you could just you could see from everything they said and how they looked at each other, and it was really dramatic. So I think what frightens me about the AfD is, and I have to say that in all clarity, they came out strongest in Saxony and in Thuringia. And there, the AfD is as far right as you can think. You can rightly call them a fascist party. And they are observed by the German FBI, and they are and they have people that don't meet democratic standards, and so that they, in those two federal states, came in strongest and gained 24%. I think that still frightens me, and it's going to be interesting to see how they will behave and how they will move forward. But this is something that should be watched. And on the other hand, as the CDU has dramatically lost also in the East, it was interesting to see that the SPD, the Social Democrats, who were, except in two states, very weak in the others, had a pretty strong showing this time. So there is a lot of movement going on. No one really knows where it ends, but I think we should be cautious, and we should be also concerned about the AfD, especially in some areas. You know, they lost dramatically in the West, but in the East, they're still pretty strong. And as I said, in two federal states, they came out strongest, and especially with a tribe of their party that is that right-wing extremists.
Well, there are pockets in the West where the AfD is a little bit stronger, and so it is definitely worth watching. But I think it's interesting to hear you describe both the left party and the AfD as there being several parties within one party, because I also think that case could be made for the Social Democrats, the Greens, and even the Christian Democrats. And it will be fascinating to see how this all plays out, because there are different factions within each of these parties. But of course, there's much more alignment under the tent of the Social Democrats and the Greens and the Christian Democrats.
Yes, I would say so too. You have always, I think, as long as you can think back, you have different factions. I think that is probably true for every party in the world. But inside the AfD or the left, you have sometimes the impression there are enemies just going after one another, and not just having just stronger disagreements, but they just fight like hell.
So Martin, as we come to an end, I have a couple of final quick questions for you. One is, how long do you think the coalition negotiations will take? Do you think we should plan on another New Year's speech by Chancellor Merkel, or do you think a new chancellor, probably a Chancellor Scholz, will be the person to make that speech?
Well, I wouldn't bet on it, but I'm pretty optimistic that we probably will see a new government before Christmas.
And the last question is, particularly given your most recent posting to the Bundespräsidialamt, to the federal president's office, of course, the next question is whether you think he will continue in this role as federal president, or what might happen with that position under a new government.
That's a very interesting question. And hypothetically, I can just put out the observations I can do. He has declared he wants to run for a second term, and now with the elections he will also have the votes for that. But he's number one in the ranking. Number two is the head of the parliament. Number three is the chancellor. So number two will be a Social Democrat, because they're the largest faction in the Bundestag. And number three, if Olaf Scholz is going to be chancellor, is going to be also a Social Democrat. Mm-hmm. So it's feasible, and we had times where this already happened, especially when the Christian Democrats ruled, but also sometimes when the Social Democrats had the majority in parliament. It can happen, but it will be a bit tough. That a party that just has just slightly above 25% will hold all three main offices. So I think that there will be some pressure. I think it will not be on the top of the agenda. They first tried to negotiate the coalition, but I could imagine that once they've settled and decided who gets which ministry and whatever, that they will also talk about the president's office, because elections will be held in February, and so also pretty soon.
Yeah.
So I could imagine that maybe the Free Democrats or the Greens will ask whether they couldn't have this job, or maybe also they offer and say, okay, the Christian Democrats are still strong. They came in second. Maybe they could choose a candidate. I think it also then there's also the gender issue. The question is, I think all three main jobs in this Federal Republic of Germany, if they're held by men, I think there will be a riot.
Yes.
That cannot be, that the president, head of parliament, and the chancellor are all men. So there will be, I think, a strong move towards a female president of the parliament. But I could also imagine that they say, we've never had a head of state, the president. I've never had a woman, so it's about time. And if they want to be a progressive government, I could see that they might also, there might be some push to actually give this job to a woman.
Well, Martin, obviously there is lots to watch in the weeks and months ahead, and I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us today. This has been a great conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope that our viewers have as well. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, and wish you a guten Aufenthalt in Washington. And I look forward to continuing the conversation at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wish you all the best. Sorry I can't see you, but feel embraced and have a great day.